Hi, I'm Micah Clark with the American Family Association, and I'm glad you joined us today. I have a good friend here with us who I'll introduce in just a second. But as it happened, last night I went to see the movie Sound of Freedom. And I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it fits in with some of the things we're going to be talking about today, which is the protection of children. Now, I have to tell you, I did not want to go see this movie. I don't want to go see a movie about human trafficking, but honestly, this is a vitally important movie you need to see. We need to support it while it's in the theaters. Someone asked me, what's the purpose of the movie? The purpose is awareness. It's excellently made. I wouldn't say it's entertaining, but it's a positive story in one sense that it is a action adventure about a man who rescues children. But of course, it's very heavy because the overarching theme of the entire thing is the problem of human trafficking. It made me angry. It made me cry. Well, not uncontrollable, but any parent who watches this is going to be struggling at times. But this is a problem. Human trafficking is a problem that our government is not sufficiently addressing. We have a lot of laws on it, but you cannot address this with an open border. And I encourage you to watch the movie. If you've seen the movie, go to YouTube and watch some of the criticisms of it. It will shock you. I have to wonder if people criticizing this movie have even seen it. And second of all, why did Hollywood reject this movie? There's a lot of questions that are going to be raised when you see it. I would encourage you to go see it. Have your friends go see it. We need to support this. Keep it in theaters as long as possible so as many people see the movie. It's very well done, and it's not it's not graphic. It is emotional, but they do a very good job of, I think, protecting the viewer as much as possible with letting you know what's happening without being disgusting or showing actual crimes against children, sexual crimes. But this is an important movie. Please go see The Sound of Freedom and tell others about it. Well, Jeff, why don't you introduce our guest today, and we'll get going.
Joining us today is Rhonda Miller. She's the director of Purple for Parents of Indiana. And welcome to the program, Rhonda. And tell us a little bit about Purple for Parents. Some people may have heard about you. Kind of what's the history of how it got started and what you're doing currently?
Yeah, thanks guys for having me on here. I certainly am honored to be with you. So Purple for Parents of Indiana actually started in 2019 kind of as an opposition to the teachers union's Red for Ed push. And so a former teacher actually started it in Indiana, the chapter here. It actually originated in Arizona. So she reached out to the founder there and she brought it here to Indiana. So she started it in the fall of 2019. In the spring of 2020, I left a former organization and then joined with Jennifer, and we became a 501c3 at that point, and we are essentially a grassroots organization that is fighting the indoctrination and the sexual grooming in our schools and exposing all of the ties and all of the entities behind that. So I've traveled the state the last 3 years, educating Hoosiers on not only what's happening in our schools, but the fact that Indiana is responsible for a great deal of it and how that happened, and the entities that are working together to transform education and to basically dumb our children down.
Rhonda, I know you're very involved in the legislative session this year, as you have been the last two or three since you started. But let's talk about, we had Jim Toms on about a month ago. I know you worked closely with Senator Toms and others. Why don't you tell our audience about what happened this previous session, what some of your priorities were? And I know, why don't we just start with the bill that Senator Toms carried and give us a little bit of the history about that, what that bill's about for our audience.
Sure. So this year it was SB 12 was our bill. This was the third year that we had been trying to pass a piece of legislation that actually overturns Indiana current statute that allows schools in public libraries to distribute pornography. It gives them a defense to prosecution. And so we've worked very diligently, as well as many of our colleagues across the nation, trying to target ours because we are one of 43 states that had that specific statute. And so this year it was SB 12. Senator Toms brought it back for the third year in a row, and they played games with it at the State House, and it was very, very frustrating. We did end up passing it. It was not exactly the format that I wanted, but we did end up passing it, and the children in the schools are now safeguarded from porn, although the public libraries, they left with the defense to prosecution.
Let me ask you something, and I know this is a touchy thing to discuss, but you've done it many times. Tell our audience, they're hearing the president, the vice president, the Senate Democrats in the Indiana legislature, Senate Democrats in the House, and I don't know if it was exactly a party line vote. We may have lost a couple Republicans, I'm not sure. But they're calling this a book banning bill. And that's just a fear tactic. But before we even address that, why don't we tell the audience about what some of these books are? And then I think they'll decide pretty quickly. Some books should be banned, if you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, we have found many books the last 3 years, and we've compiled a list each year and taken them to the legislatures. For the most part, it had been print and in text format. So they're very descriptive scenes of rape, of sexual encounters. It's very, very graphic depictions of that. This year, we were able to come up with some picture books. And I do believe, and we were sending copies of those books to Senator Toms so that he had them. And many of the legislatures and the library individuals were coming to him wanting to see these books that we were uncovering. And they're extremely graphic. I mean, federal law is that you cannot distribute that stuff across state lines, but yet they're doing it, and they're distributing it into our schools and libraries, and then the children have access to it from there. So these particular books that we found this year are more of the picture nature, and so you can see scenes of masturbation, oral sex. You can see many different sexual encounters, and they're promoting the children to go to porn sites. They're promoting them to go onto these different platforms and look up porn. And so it encourages the kids for this sexual activity. So this year, I think those particular books, as we discussed with Senator Toms, were what finally pushed the bill over the edge and got them to pass at least the school portion of it and to safeguard the children in the public school libraries.
Now, one of the things, Rhonda, people may be asking, so what are the ages of the kids who have access to this currently? Where are you finding them? Are you finding them in elementary schools and junior highs, middle schools, high schools? Where did you find most of these books? Across all of them? Where did you find them?
So we concentrated most of our efforts in the middle school and high school is where we were finding most of the graphic stuff. Now you will find some lesser graphic material in the elementary schools, but most of ours concentrated in the middle school and high school. However, I will tell you, one of our board members went to a public library in Franklin in Johnson County and found a book called Let's Talk About It. And that book is accessible by any child in that library. She asked if any child could come in and check it out. And she said, and she was told yes, that any child has access to that book. And that is the book that we left float around the State House for about 2 weeks so that all the legislatures could take a look at it. And so regardless of whether or not it's accessible in the schools in the elementary level, they can still find it in the public library.
Rhonda, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
One of the other things that kind of struck me about when the whole debate was happening, you had mentioned that you gave a lot of these books to Senator Toms, was the fact that Senator Toms could not even read any of them on the floor of the Senate. Yet they're accessible in public libraries, and were, until you recently, were able to get them in school libraries. That's kind of telling, isn't it, Rhonda?
It's very telling. And I will just tell you, Jeff, the first year we actually went to the Senate with this piece of legislation was in 2021. And we had taken a packet of these excerpts that we were finding, and we had left them with Senator Jeff Rotz, the chairman of the Education Committee, which is where the bill was heard that year. We had left them with the committee members, and before we even started testifying, 3 different times they sent individuals out to tell us we could not read the excerpts from those books. Now, we weren't planning on it, but it's very telling. And as we stood there with the individuals that were telling us this, and we're like, they're making the point. And even former Deputy Attorney General Aaron Negengard, who testified with us that year, he pointed that out in his testimony, that that our children are being given this for homework, but yet we're being told we can't read it in front of the committee because it's being live streamed into classrooms.
Senator Mike Young made that point this year on the floor so well. He was talking about his intern, and he was working on the bill with Senator Thomas, and he made the point, I cannot show this to my intern. It's in my drawer in my desk. If I do this on the Senate floor, it is a criminal act. But if I do it in a school, it's not. And that's the problem. If you show kids pornography outside the school, you can be prosecuted. You show them inside the school, you can't. They have a defense. And you know, we were a little hamstrung, Rhonda, where we couldn't do this. Now, I did, like you, I was there. I didn't want to show this, but I did want legislators to see it and say, this is what you're defending. And yet we still had, almost on a party line vote, not only did frankly the Democrats vote against this bill, many of them got up and spoke against it and totally lied. Can I say that, Rhonda? Lied about what this bill was about. They wanted to say this was about banning Gone with the Wind or Great Expectations or some classic works, which frankly most schools don't even promote anymore. I wish we did have classic literature in schools. The stuff we're talking about is mostly new, and a lot of parents have never heard of these titles before, and so I don't want to be I'm interviewing you, so I'll let you. I'm get off my soapbox here, but tell us what happened to the bill at the next step after the hearing.
Yeah. So before I address that, I will just say, yeah, the Democrats are using the American Library Association talking points.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to realize that the ALA is basically run by Marxists. So when you take that into consideration, you understand where they're coming from and why they're
Mm-hmm.
making that point. And they like to hammer it home with ban books. You know, we're not banning books. We're protecting children from this nasty pornographic material. And I also, every time I testify, I bring up the communist goals because you have to refer to those 24, 25, and 26 deal with this issue specifically. And the more we can get people to understand that this is a greater agenda than just, you know, giving children pornography, that it's by design and it's meant to destroy the family, destroy the individual, and get them hooked on a most powerful drug, because porn is actually considered more powerful than any other drug. So with that said, this year was very interesting. So let me just back up to the first year we introduced this bill. Senator Thomas got it and introduced it as he said he would, and that year it came out of committee. We did get it passed out of committee. However, he was not allowed to call it to the floor for a second vote, and so that was very frustrating for both of us. And then last year in 2022, he promised he would be back, and he held true to his word. And so he did. He brought it back. He filed it on organizational day, so there was plenty of time. We got an early bill number on it. It was SB 17 in 2022. And so as I was on vacation between Christmas and New Year's, I had multiple phone calls coming in that Senator Thomas was trying to get a hold of me. So I called him, and we had a conversation about the fact that our bill was being hijacked, and it was essentially put into two other bills, one in the Senate and one in the House. And then it became a real tug of war trying to get our bill passed. SB, I think it was SB 188, if I remember right, or 168, ended up dying in the Senate, which then paved way for our bill to get a fair up and down hearing. And so it did, but unfortunately enough time had passed that it gave, when it came out of committee, it came out of the Senate, it went over to the House, it gave Bob Boehning the ability to use it as an excuse that he ran out of time. We didn't have time to hear the bill. We confronted him in the off the chamber of the House, and that is what he told us. Unfortunately, he did have time because he put two more bills on the last day of hearing on his committee hearing schedule. So he did have time. He chose not to do it. So we started asking a lot of questions as what was really going on, and why was it such a battle to pass this bill to protect children, right? So we knew we were dealing with some very strong forces against us. So this year, Senator Thomas again came back with this very same bill again. And this time, instead of going to education, Senate Pro Tem Rod Bray decided he was going to send it over to the judiciary. Well, now that is where Chairman Liz Brown is at, and she is. There's a lot of concern with her in the Senate. Let's just put it that way. And so it drug on and drug on, and she was not going to hear the bill. We took off time from work, went down there, tried to meet with her, tried to convince her to give this bill a hearing. It came down to the last day before the hearing final, and she did at the last minute get enough pressure, we believe, to go ahead and give the bill a hearing. But what we were hearing was she was also going to strip it. And so we prepared. I gathered about 20 of us to go down there and testify. We prepared for that. And so unfortunately, right before committee started, she did send out an amendment. It was like 5 minutes before committee hearing started. The amendment was posted. We kept checking throughout, the day before. It was not posted for us to view, and it wasn't until right before the committee started. So as we're all in the room preparing for this, I had my testimony. She had gone from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, so I'm trying to change my testimony is what I'm going to say. About that time, my friend finally found the amendment. She hands me her phone so I can read it, and indeed, she did strip the entire bill. And so, by God's design, I had gotten up and signed up to be the first one to speak. I had signed up at midnight, so I was able to get up right away and confront her about the fact that she stripped the bill. She then flat out said, no, that wasn't what her intent was, as her assistant reaches over next to her and shows her that, yeah, that was what had taken place. And I do believe Liz Brown was lying. That is my belief. And nobody at this point will convince me otherwise, because we had been told that that's what she was going to do. And so anyway, so she sent the entire committee into total chaos, because they had all agreed that this was what was going to happen. It was very plain, as this was playing out, that was what indeed was taking place. And so she ended up amending it on the fly. But when she amended it on the fly, she had said that that the intent was to include all of SB 12 in her amendment, which it didn't include any of it. So when she amended it, she kept the protection in place for the public libraries, which tells me that was not her intent. Her intent was to completely strip the bill. And so it threw the committee into total chaos. I mean, Micah will tell you, it's something I've never experienced in the time that I've been doing this. Micah's been doing it a lot longer than I have. But because the discussion that took place in that room was actually quite comical to watch, because everybody on the committee was confused. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what she was amending. She was amending it on the fly. So needless to say, it did get amended. They removed the protections for the public school libraries, left it intact for the public libraries. It came out of committee, and so I will tell you that one of the Republican senators was sitting there next to one of the Democrats and said to him, "This is not what we agreed on." So that tells me there was an agreement ahead of time as to what was supposed to take place. So it did come out of committee. It did pass the Senate floor, and then it went over to the House, where it went into the Education Committee, which is where Representative Becky Cash was at. Now, she had carried this bill, the exact same language of Senator Tom's bill, in the House. We asked her to do that early on so that we could see if Chairman Boehning was going to give it a hearing, and he did not, and he played the same game. So when it goes over to the House, she was the sponsor in the House, and so she carried it. And again, Bob Boehning played games with it. And so we know this was all coming down from leadership. A team of ours went in and had a meeting with Bob Boehning. He admitted that he was doing what he was told to do. And so they eventually were trying to hijack it, put it into a Senate bill, which would have caused germane issues when it back to the Senate. He admitted that in this private meeting. And so what essentially happened is they put it into House Bill 1447, which was Representative Shibley's bill on surveys. And so it became kind of a quagmire of joining forces with two different subjects, right? And to put it into this bill. So then it goes into conference committee, and they tweaked the language of it. It did come out. We did end up passing it and removing the protections for the public schools, but they left the language for the public library or public employee intact. Removed the educational defense, so that's now gone. So the school board will now essentially be responsible if they do not remove this material. There's a process that's now in place that will go into effect in January 1 that the parents have to work through in order to get this material removed. However, in the statute, it does say that schools cannot allow material harmful to minors or obscene materials in the schools. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. We know schools are already, I've seen emails and examples, the schools are already using the excuse of its literary and its scientific value and artistic. So it's going to be a challenge, I still think, getting some of this material removed. Liz Brown did claim several times in the committee hearing that obscenity has always been illegal and it can always be prosecutable. So we've sent teams in to talk to their prosecutors and say, are you going to prosecute this material? Because according to Liz Brown, it is illegal and it can be prosecuted. And we're hearing that prosecutors aren't going to do it. So I think we've got a greater battle now that we've removed the obscenity exemption, but we've still got a greater battle on our hands.
Well, I encourage you, it only takes one prosecutor to send a signal to all the schools. So if you get one county prosecutor to act on something, to see this material, if it's in the school, and go after it. I think one of the things I'm thinking about as I listen to your story, it really tells our audience some of the powerful forces you're up against: the Library Association, the ACLU, School Board Association, and others in the education establishment who fought tooth and nail against this. I remember thinking, listening to some of the testimony when I was there, man, some of these people shouldn't be within a mile of a child if this is what they think is okay for children to see. But so I commend you. You had a great victory. I know we didn't get everything. It's kind of like the old saying, don't watch sausage and laws being made because it's an ugly process. But after 3 years, and sometimes it takes that long to get something, this is a big victory. Well, this was part one of this interview with Purple for Parents. Next week we'll have part two, of course. And the purpose of a lot of these videos so far has been to introduce you to different people, different groups in Indiana who are doing good things for families. And so I hope you enjoyed part one of this interview with Rhonda Miller of Purple for Parents. Join us next week for the second half, where she talks about the Kinsey Institute, other legislation, some events that she's hosting, and opportunities to work with Purple for Parents. And again, thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.